We are honored today to have U.S. Senator Elissa Slotkin join us for a conversation that is of critical importance to this region. Most of you know Senator Slotkin's very impressive resume. She, even though she is a young person, has committed her life to public service. She was an assistant secretary at the Department of Defense. She was an official at the CIA. She was elected to the United States House of Representatives here in Michigan in 2019. And just a few months ago, we elevated her to the United States Senate. Congratulations. We're delighted to have your leadership in Michigan. She's a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee as well as the Homeland Security Committee, befitting someone with such a national security background. And national security is a key issue that we're going to be talking about today. In partnership with a Republican colleague, Senator Bernie Moreno from our neighboring state of Ohio, introduced the draft version of the Connected Vehicle Security Act of 2026. And that legislation, even though it's still in its early phases, is something that the industry, our organizations are very excited about because it's absolutely critical. It is absolutely critical that we protect a fair playing field for our key industry, automotive and mobility and technology. It is also imperative that we protect American businesses and American people from what the senator calls, and I'm going to step on your line, and I'm sorry, our mobile intel gathering devices from our roads. But it's a tricky issue. It's not as simple as just saying no Chinese cars. It's not nearly that simple. So we're going to be talking about that today. And helping us moderate the discussion is our very good friend, Guy Gordon. Guy Gordon of NBC Detroit fame, of WJR fame. He's an award-winning journalist, and we have used Guy many, many times, especially when the issue is around mobility and automotive. Today's program, as you see from your agenda cards, will be in 3 parts. Guy will join the senator first for a one-on-one discussion. Then my colleague, Glenn Stevens, Executive Director of MichAuto, and myself will join the conversation. And if we have some time, and I think we will, the senator will take some audience questions. So with that, please welcome Guy Gordon and the Honorable Elissa Slotkin.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon to those that are joining online. I want to remind you, and when you ask your questions, that we are streaming this, so your questions will be public, if you will, but it's great to have you all with us. Senator, what's the old Chinese curse? May you live in interesting times?
Yeah, too interesting.
Okay, I guess we're here to talk about what could be potentially a different kind of Chinese curse, which is a connected automobile that's flush with Chinese-built software and hardware. You unveiled this bill a week ago yesterday with Senator Bernie Moreno, as Sandy pointed out. How important was the timing as we see President Trump getting ready to head to talk to President Xi in his summit?
Yeah, well, hi, everybody. Thank you for having me, and thank you to Sandy and the Chamber for organizing this. This is our first big Detroit event on this bill. Senator Moreno and I are both freshman senators, and so we got to know each other literally in orientation. And he came to me months ago, frankly, based off of something that happened right here in Detroit, which was the president came here and spoke to the Detroit Economic Club and said, paraphrased at that venue, you know, maybe it's time we think about selling Chinese cars in the United States. Certainly got my attention, the attention of a lot of people. And now we're barreling towards a big summit on May 14th. And, you know, US and China sitting together, hammering out some sort of deal. And I think there was a lot of, frankly, static in the system in Washington that potentially this was going to be a deal where the president said it was okay to bring in, for instance, BYD vehicles, Chinese vehicles of some kind. So we wanted to send very deliberately a bipartisan signal to the world that regardless of which party we're in, regardless of how we disagree maybe on other issues, that on the issue of bringing in Chinese automobiles into the United States, we were in agreement. So we hammered out a bill. I can't tell you how nice it was to actually be sitting like with your sleeves rolled up, Democrat and Republican, like hammering out sentences and lines. And that hasn't happened enough in my short year in the Senate. But that's what we did. And then, just last week in the House, a group of, I think, 50 Republican House members wrote a letter, similar letter to Trump saying, please don't do this. So there's a lot of noise in the system. We wanted to put down a piece of legislation.
So how stout is that support from Republicans? Because we have seen the president certainly has an inclination to do this as a lone wolf, whether it's tariffs, whether it's sanctions, whether it's retaliation for something that somebody said. And House Republicans, Senate Republicans have been more than happy to give him free rein to do that. So when push comes to shove, if he thinks bringing in Chinese automobiles is good and will lead to more jobs, do you think that support from Republicans will remain?
Look, I think there's literally a debate going on within the White House. We literally have heard that there are some advisors who are very pro, let's make a deal, right? I mean, some of the original angel investors in BYD in the Chinese vehicles was Berkshire Hathaway, right? So there's very powerful people who are saying, hey, maybe it's time we bring in these vehicles, and then very strong voices on the other side within the Republican Party. So you can see that playing out in the Hill. You can see that playing out with some people who are like, they don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. They don't, maybe don't have a lot of American auto industry, tier 1, tier 2 suppliers, so they're kind of not involved. And then, but what I think has been striking, unlike other issues, is there's just a lot of my Republican colleagues who are willing to put their name on a piece of paper. I'm doing Fox right after this with Bernie. I mean, that's different.
So when you look at this is an out-and-out ban. The language from the bill is prohibit the importation, manufacture, sale, resale, or introduction into interstate commerce in the United States of connected vehicles and related software and hardware associated with foreign adversaries. Defining that will be something we want to get into. But first of all, this is broad, and it is a broad ban on everything, including the manufacturer. Why must it be so broad? What have you seen in the EU experience with the introduction of these vehicles that makes them, the threat level, that high?
Yeah. So I think part of the reason Bernie and I work well together, Bernie Moreno and I work well together, is that he's the guy who used, his career was, he had a bunch of dealerships, right? A very strong dealer. And I come from the national security world. And I think the example of Europe is a perfect example of what I'm concerned to not see here in the United States. The Europeans allowed Chinese vehicles to be sold there starting 2021, and they have just gobbled up market share. The Chinese have...
That says that they're good, though, and that consumers like them.
Well, look, it certainly says that they're cheap. And it certainly says that they're a decent enough car that people are buying them again. But just so we understand, the Chinese have an economic playbook when it comes to their product. Okay. They usually steal intellectual property on something that they like. In this case, this BYD vehicle looks awful like a Tesla, right? They reverse engineer it. They figure out how to add bells and whistles. And then they deeply, deeply subsidize the price of that vehicle. The Chinese Communist Party dumps a ton of money into those vehicles. So right now, depending on which model you get in Europe, it's $11,000 to $14,000 Tesla.
Really?
Yeah, it's a cheap vehicle. So you can see why, with people being cost conscious, they've gone to buy that vehicle. But that vehicle, as you all know, also has 3D mapping, full motion video, LiDAR collecting a ton of stuff. It has geolocation for whoever's driving it. And then if you've got a Bluetooth device in your pocket, as most of us do, it can be remotely hacked and piloted from Beijing.
Can't we say the same thing about our smartphones? Aren't they a conduit when we get into American cars as well?
We want, and there's lots of people in this room who are hell-bent on building really, really technologically advanced vehicles. But here's the thing. They're subject to American law. I believe in the standards that our American companies and even our allied neighbors, Toyota, those folks that are from allied nations, their ability to live under the international system and international law is fundamentally different than the Chinese. And so as an intelligence officer, the idea that you could have a fleet of these folks driving around Selfridge Air Force Base or at major infrastructure sites, taking all that data, all that video, all that mapping, and sending that back. as someone who's from the Pentagon, right, that is the exact detailed information an adversarial nation loves to have in their war planning. So to me, it really was both a national security issue and an economic security issue.
But again, can't a comparably equipped American vehicle that hasn't been properly screened do the same thing? I'm almost getting the Goshen boogeyman feel here. In terms of this, aren't there ways to mitigate that? And don't we need to be doing that anyway because of the variety of ways that they can surveil?
The way you mitigate it, again, we all know, I mean, I drove here in a Ford, like we all know that the cars have become very, very sophisticated. But my faith in what Ford or any other American company or allied company is going to be doing with my data is fundamentally different than what I know as an intelligence officer Beijing does with the data that they collect. So it's not that we want our American cars to be less sophisticated. I just believe that before we ever let a vehicle drive around this country, they should be set up to the same national security standards that any other device would have coming in the United States.
So you've pointed out that from an economic security standpoint, that with these vehicles being so highly subsidized,
Yep.
I mean, that is, an $11,000 Tesla is almost irrational to wrap your mind around. But can that be mitigated in other ways, through tariffs, through regulations, through other avenues other than, forgive me, building a wall to keep these Chinese vehicles
Yeah, so
out?
again, I think to be honest, I mean, a lot of this idea of taking a fine-toothed national security comb to new products coming in the United States was started in Trump's first administration. He set up this office at the Department of Commerce to look at not just vehicles, but drones or other pieces of sophisticated equipment. And Biden continued that office. I think what's different is we're not totally sure where the second Trump administration is landing on this. But there are lots of ways to do this. But look, we're right across the river from Canada that's announced that they're going to allow Chinese vehicles to be sold. The Mexicans are already, it's just eating up market share. Chinese vehicles are being sold in Mexico. And you probably saw there's been some reporting, I think in the Wall Street Journal, that people are driving those vehicles over our southern border. Like, it's here. It's happening. So I think the importance of a bipartisan piece of legislation was to say, hey, before you make a deal on Chinese vehicles coming into the United States, please just be aware of the strength of feeling around this. We can get the legislation right, but we wanted to get it out before May 14th.
But to the president's point of what he was talking about here in January, he also talked about it on the campaign trail. That his basic line was, I don't care where they come from, as long as they build the product here, we can figure out a way to make them welcome. So I understand sales, importation of the vehicles. Certainly you'll want to regulate what kind of hardware and software are there. Why manufacture? Why not build them here and create American jobs that way? I mean, that's kind of what we've done with the transplants from Japan. That was an equally thorny issue, certainly in the 70s and 80s and 90s.
Yeah. Again, we have Toyota down the street with lots of jobs here, doing lots of work and business with our companies, and I don't have a problem with that because I don't believe, as an intelligence officer and as a senator from Michigan, that the Japanese are taking the data from their vehicles and using that for negative purposes. I cannot say the same about the Chinese government. That's the fundamental difference. So if you're, a Volkswagen or a Hyundai or whatever, we've worked with those companies for decades and decades. That's not my concern. The Chinese system, it's kind of like when we banned TikTok, right? Our kids are using TikTok. All that data about our kids, what they look like, facial recognition, their preferences, where they live, where they go, what they do, it was all being sent back to Beijing. I don't want them having that data. And literally a Chinese BYD vehicle is TikTok on wheels, period.
Well, you've called it a surveillance package, and I understand that. But again, when your child brings that TikTok or that app, and heaven knows they're probably downloading things that are loaded with all kinds of nasty software running in the background. How do we make sure, don't we just need to harden the entire connected vehicle segment, and doesn't that take care of most of your concerns?
I think there's tons of flexibility when you're talking about software and hardware on how do we make sure that the data that's collected from these things is not being sent back to an adversarial government, to the Chinese Communist Party. That's to me where there's
Some of us consider Facebook adversarial. I mean,
well, but
you
they're
look at the
subject to
addictive
American law,
capability. Right.
You may not like what's his name, Zuckerberg, right? You may not like all these social media, American social media companies. They may collect way too much on you and know if you're thinking of buying a new,
And not necessarily acting in our child's best interest.
100%, 100%. But they're subject to American law, and if they abuse that information and turn it into something dangerous, then we can hold them accountable. I cannot do the same for the Chinese.
There was a similar bill passed back in, or I should say introduced, back I believe it was September of 2024. And there were 19 different groups, the Sierra Club, kind of the usual suspects, that were violently against it. I know the UAW, you say you've got Republicans, have really reacted favorably to what you proposed last week. But the environmental groups were very clear in saying if this keeps clean, affordable vehicles out of the hands of the American consumer with what they see as an existential threat of climate change, then that is working against us, not just in the short term, but in the long term as well.
Yeah.
How do you balance that?
I mean, my responsibility as a leader is to protect American citizens and the American homeland, and I see these vehicles and those packages inside them as a threat. So to me, that supersedes environmental concerns and a desire to have more electric or connected or autonomous vehicles in the United States. I have to do what I think is right. Do you think that I was popular when I voted to ban TikTok? I mean, you can imagine the number of kids who had never called their congressperson in their lives were like, how do I get mad at my congressperson? They were big mad about it. And sometimes you have to make decisions that are for the safety of the security of that young person, even when they don't like it. We all understand that, and that's how I feel about this legislation, whether you're an environmental group. Look, the thing I feel very sensitive about is people are stressed about their costs, right? That is not a joke. And so I understand that people are looking to buy a cheaper car. You all understand that. So what I feel like is a more effective question is, how are you withholding an $11,000 Tesla from the American people who might want it, with all kinds of cool features where you can sing karaoke or whatever the hell you do?
Right, and that competition has also led to better vehicles from the American and domestic manufacturers, be it efficiency, reliability, innovation.
I will put our American producers against anyone in the world if there's an even playing field. But that's not what this is.
And you don't see any way that we could level this playing field with China?
I think,
putting the national security interests aside, just from an economic security
I think that
fairness.
the Chinese cheat so profoundly in the international system. And I would love it if the president went to this summit in a few days and said, we're just absolutely going to deal and wheel with you but we're not going to make real progress until you stop cheating on the international system. Nothing would make me happier. But the Chinese do this with a huge number of their products. Drones. We invented drones. Remember when GoPro used to make drones? Anyone remember that? We were the ones who invented it, okay? And then the Chinese took the IP,
right,
reverse engineered it, subsidized the hell out of the drone market, and now it is very hard to find a good non-Chinese drone. That is the strategy, and I'm not going to let that happen to autos when I'm the senator.
So again, just to kind of close the circle here, what are the takeaways that you would like to see as President Trump leaves Beijing after this summit?
Yeah. I want the president to have a full-throated conversation on their economic cheating, on their military expansionism, potentially even providing the Iranians right now real-time information on U.S. movements and U.S. soldiers. That's a non-starter for me. I want them...
what would be the litmus test that might allow them to manufacture vehicles here in the United States?
For me, we'd have to have a conversation again about they could never have, in my mind, more than a 15 or, depending on the part, 15 or 25% stake in any kind of joint venture. I want us in the driver's seat, organizations and companies that I trust. And I'd have to understand that the data from any product that they make, part or entire vehicle, was not being sent back to Beijing for uses on things that we have no control over.
All right, let's bring in a couple other voices
here
to join us.
You bet.
The Grand Poobah of the Greater Regional Detroit Chamber of Commerce, Sandy Baruah, and our esteemed Director of MichAuto, Glenn Stevens. Gentlemen.
Poobah.
The Grand Poobah.
Thanks, Guy.
You guys look like you're having fun.
Well, this is a fascinating conversation, and you know, if you look at this from a macro standpoint, you say protectionism probably is a bad thing. But in this case, when it's on a national security foundation, it's a good conversation to have.
Yeah, I'll just say, you know, obviously the senator is going to take the lead in the conversation about national security issues. But, you know, on the economic side, you know, the term that hasn't been used is what the Chinese are doing are essentially dumping vehicles. And I think many of you are familiar with that term. Because of the heavy subsidies, they are selling their products across the planet at a far below market rate, far below their actual costs level. And Glenn will talk about this for two reasons. One is the massive subsidies that these Chinese companies get. Secondly, the strategy of the Chinese government is an intentional overproduction of vehicles. So, Glenn, how many more vehicles do they make in China than they actually can consume? It's like
so the market
million?
demand's about 25 million.
Yeah.
They build about 34, but they have a capacity for 50.
Right.
So
They're exporting 8 million.
They're exporting 8 million.
And that's double their nearest
yes,
competitor.
by far.
Yeah.
And those vehicles are going around the world, and they're actually building 3 million units of capacity, mostly in Eastern Europe right now, potentially in Mexico, potentially in Canada. So this expansion is so vast and so quick, and it is. I mean, we can debate, you know, the structural. It's not debatable. And I'm not a protectionist. I'm a realist. We have to draw a line right now, and not worry about, whoa, we let this happen. Now what do we do? And that's what's happening in Europe.
Mm-hmm. And I don't want our companies to have to compete with that level of subsidy and that level of overproduction. I mean, just like any product, I don't care if it's a commodity product or if it's a high-tech product, if you have way more production of that product, you know, the price is just automatically going to collapse because, you know, selling it at a loss is better than not selling it at all.
In my former life at WJR, I can almost hear the phones ringing right now with folks from on the conservative side of the ledger saying, hey, it's not like we didn't subsidize the bejesus out of our automotive companies. The Inflation Reduction Act was probably, what, $1.2 trillion over 10 years.
But that was for American buyers here, not for us to go dump our, you know,
But
Cadillac
say,
Vistics and Mach-E's across the planet.
But isn't it the pot calling the kettle black when we were doing the same thing over here to bolster our industry?
No, but again, I think it's because we're talking about our internal American market.
I didn't say the callers were reasonable, Sandy. I just said that they would want an answer.
Well,
to that.
I'm often not reasonable either, so.
I would just say, I mean, I think again, I don't think it's a fair apples to apples comparison, but I also don't think the answer, I mean, look, China is a confounding problem. It's not like the USSR, right? I'm a Cold War kid. It was us against them. It was a military conversation, an arms control issue. We didn't have interdependencies with their economy. They didn't make anything that we wanted. So we were not, it was just kind of red versus blue. But it's much more complicated with China because everyone in this room has some sort of relationship with a Chinese supplier. They are the only ones who produce things. They produce it cheaper. So I am the first to acknowledge it is a complex, kind of wicked issue because we need them and we have concerns about them at the same time.
So how do you undo the supply chain for some automakers that are already here in America who are using Chinese software, hardware in their connected vehicles and intend to in the future? How do you unravel that?
Well, for me, again, this is what we were trying to do, is set some standards and some goals in the medium term that we can get to so that we don't have those dependencies. And we're living the negative reactions to these dependencies, right? The president comes in and he levies a bunch of tariffs, and the Chinese are not happy about that. So what do? They put a stranglehold on critical minerals. Well, we don't produce a whole lot of those critical minerals. They do have us kind of by the neck when they do that. So what does the president do? He has to relent. So China, because of its size, its natural resources, its very cheap workforce, has the ability to have a veto on us if they want it when we're dependent on them. So we know since COVID, it's been very popular to talk about diversification, making sure you're not single sourced to China. And for me, this is the next part of that story.
Well, to your point, one of the stories recently, which was kind of an aha moment, was the Chinese-built cranes that are being used in our nation's ports.
All of them.
That are connected and could be crashed intentionally and render us the inability to bring in a lot of things.
Well, I don't think you unravel that easily. You can't,
No.
because this is a complex global supply chain. The OEMs have different partnerships around the world. The suppliers certainly do. And what's a smart part or what isn't a smart part? And they've intentionally left this open to be established as we move along to write this properly. But if you don't draw a line now, it'll be too late. And that's the key. And I want to underscore also, this is not just a Detroit issue. This is a national issue, because it does impact those other companies from other countries like Honda, Hyundai, Mercedes, BMW that use American workers and build here, and they do it the right way. They're part of the market too. We build 8 million units every year in this country, and they're not all Detroit 3. So it's a complex issue.
You know, when the president was here, and the two of you talked a lot about the president's remarks, the reason why it sent chills down our spines is because, you know, when the president says, well, you know, maybe we'll let the Chinese if they build here. And on the face of it, it sounds a lot like, well, that's what we told the South Koreans, that's what we told the Japanese. And that has worked out, you know, well, in the sense that, you know, increased competition, it's made our companies better, it's given the consumer more choice, you know, they're employing American workers. So on the face of it, oh gee, that sounds like a fine idea because we did it with the Koreans and the Japanese. But this is so very, very different than that. If the Chinese are allowed to build here, and think of it, some southern governor is probably chomping at the bit to make a deal with a BYD or a Geely to put a plant in his or her state. But the issues that the senator is raising about the national security implications and the economic implications, it doesn't matter if the cars are built in China, Mexico, or the United States, these Chinese cars I'm referring to, they will be sold at such a deep discount that it puts our manufacturers, our workers, I don't care if it's Mercedes, a German company, Toyota, a Japanese company, or General Motors, an American company, puts those companies in America at a huge, huge, huge competitive disadvantage. And I just don't think we can afford that as a nation.
And you don't think there's any way that we can mitigate that? Because this is really what it's, is there a way we can negotiate or regulate our way out of this at some point?
At some point, I kind of agree with what the senator said a few minutes ago. I think the answer is maybe, right? But it really depends on the Chinese government changing their behavior. It's really not the Chinese companies we have an issue with. It's the Chinese government, because it doesn't matter how independent a Chinese company is, they still have that connection.
We can say, as the senator said, that there is a threshold of ownership that you cannot exceed in a joint venture. We can say that. They did that.
Right.
That is how the market was created in China. I've been there. I visited many times. I visited BYD in Shenzhen, and what has happened in a remarkable short time is a credit to them too. Let's not kid ourselves. The technology advancements are real, and we have a lot to learn from them. And
And they learned a lot from us.
And they did, but that was all controlled. It was all established by a master plan, by a subsidized government, by controlled joint ventures. We can do the same thing. So the question you had is, can this happen long term?
Right.
Well,
if they have
sure.
hostile intent,
Sure
can we ever trust them? Is there anything we can do that can wipe that away? Because I'm not sure that I think they're.
I mean, things change, right? I mean, countries that we were at war with, you know, decades ago, we're now friends with. I mean, so things can change.
To the Bill's point, that adversarial government, I think, was the. How do we define that? Because it's more than China that this bill
it's a term of art.
mentions.
I mean, so adversarial nation right now is considered China, North Korea, Iran, And then and Russia, depending
Russia.
on how we define it. And there's a couple of other, if we suddenly had a huge company coming out of Belarus who wanted to set up here, like I'd want some time to do my research, I guess I would say. But those are the big dogs that we use as a standard, and who are actively, in many cases, spying on us, who are actively providing intelligence to to other adversaries. So again, this is not, maybe because I spend a lot of time in the classified world. Like the Chinese, we may work with them every single day, but at the same time that they're working with our companies, they have very different agendas than we would like on their military side.
As you look forward, how do we handle this? This certainly would put a much greater emphasis on what happens with the USMCA as it's reopened, correct?
Yes.
Because we're going to have to deal with, well, if they want to use some componentry of ours, might we face retaliation if we ban the Chinese componentry? And what do you do when a Canadian family wants to come to Detroit in a BYD vehicle?
Yeah, well, we're working on a bill right now to say that that's a problem. I'm not gonna allow them to cross the Ambassador Bridge and just start collecting on Selfridge Air Force Base or on some of our big electricity transmission sites, just because the Canadians have decided, out of spite, to allow the Chinese vehicles in. To be honest, when it comes to USMCA, or what used to be known as NAFTA, I think my biggest concern right now with that negotiation is that there's such a tit for tat going on with the Canadians and the president that it's like every normal issue that we're used to dealing with here in Michigan all the time has been kind of sucked into this political fight that they're having. We saw that with the Gordie Howe, right? I mean, we're like ready to open that sucker. It's one of the most bipartisan things that I have seen here in the state, started by Governor Snyder, and it's now being kind of sucked into this bigger catfight that we're having between the U.S. and Canada. That does not do us well here in Detroit and in Michigan in general. That's my biggest concern for USMCA, that we'll be stuck because of kind of these grievances.
Right. And we got to get that unstuck. We just do. I mean, we are stronger together as a trade bloc.
Yeah.
We are. Do we have some things to work out on the rules of origin and issues like? Absolutely. But to dissolve that bloc and for us to go it alone separately, that just weakens us, weakens our country, weakens the state, and we have to figure this out. So I hope calmer heads are going to prevail with that.
And if the Canadians and Mexicans, though, are going to be doing business with a nation that we see as overtly hostile to us, how do we get past that in that negotiation?
Look, the way you get past any problem you have, it's not like we don't have issues, even as partner nations. You get through it because adults take over, sit in a room, kick out the media, and have a real conversation.
There you go on the media.
I mean, I'm just saying, when you're performing for the bleachers, you don't always make the best decisions for a deal. And I see that over and over with my peers. I see it every single day. So you guys are doing your job, but a lot of people that I work with play to the bleachers, okay? And I think for me, though, I think the other reason why Canada is important and why alliances are important is because China's economy is so big. Their capabilities are so significant, their workforce is so huge, that one of the only ways to compete economically is to have kind of economic coalitions of the willing who say, hey, we're going to band together, link arms, and not allow China to do X, Y, and Z. We're going to negotiate as a bloc. Critical minerals is a perfect example. It's not like, Poland has all the critical minerals that they want or whatever. Banding together helps us astronomically make better deals with the Chinese. Right now, our alliances are feeling strained. Right? They're feeling like they don't want to be so friendly with us. And that's a problem on the military side when they don't show up for our wars, but it's also a big deal economically when we're trying to compete against China.
And the other thing I want to underscore is that when you draw a line or build a wall, it doesn't mean you stand still. We have to innovate. We better do a lot more investment in innovation across all sectors, whether it's defense or agriculture or automotive and mobility. We have to do that, and we have to build our own supply chains. There's bits and pieces of that being done, but another reason to be with Canada is critical mineral supply. Mm-hmm. So if we don't develop and control a piece of the battery supply chain, we will be beholden to basically 3 countries, mostly China. And that's where we're at right now. So drawing a line right now is the right thing to do, but establishing a longer-term policy, where's our roadmap? They have a roadmap, we need roadmaps.
Senator, how much does Iran complicate this? Because we know that the president is dying to have China weigh in and apply serious pressure to Iran to open the Strait of Hormuz. Certainly it's in their best interest to have that happen from an energy security standpoint. How worried are you that he might be willing to forego a lot of these concerns and give up a lot to get that from the Chinese?
Well, I think part of the reason we did this bill is because we're just not sure what the contours of the deal are when the president meets with Xi Jinping. We just don't know. And given that we now have the Strait of Hormuz as a fundamental problem that affects everyone in this room, every Michigander, every American, with the price of gas and fertilizer and so many other things, there's certainly, I mean, they have to talk about Iran at the summit. And, you know, our hope is that it's not just Iran, that we don't give away things just to get help on the Strait of Hormuz and with the Iranian government, that we have a kind of stand back, comprehensive look. But the truth is, we're not going into a negotiation with our strongest foot forward. We need that strait open. Right? We're desperate for it to be open. When you go into a negotiation like that, it's not always the best place to negotiate the best deal.
No, I know looking in the rearview mirror is really not that productive, but this conversation just highlights how important American alliances are. Think how much stronger we would be in this, I'm going to call it a conversation with China, if, you know, the North American bloc were united and cooperating, that we had strong relationships with our Asian counterparts, the EU. If we were all on, it doesn't even have to be exactly the same page, but if we were at least on the same chapter on how to deal with China, I think China has done such a good job of kind of dividing and conquering, right? But if we were to kind of operate as a Western bloc on the issues of China, we would be in so much better position than we are now.
And are we close to the EU getting there, especially when they see the dramatic penetration into their automotive market? And certainly it's not something that, for instance, the German automakers can be very happy about.
Well, so
are you at an inflection point there yet?
There's kind of a mix there. The European automakers sell a lot into China, or at least they used to. The share of the European automakers vehicle sales in China has dropped like a rock because
right.
The
Everybody's
Chinese
share has.
Well, no, because the Chinese cars have gotten so good, and they are good. So the European automakers really didn't push back as hard as they should have, because they said, well, listen, I need the China market, especially Volkswagen Group and like BMW really needed the China market because so much of their sales used to go there. So they had to let the Chinese vehicles in, and now they're, well, I'll use a technical term. Now they're really screwed. They're not selling their cars in China, and they're being taken out to lunch in their home market.
Yeah, the foreign automakers in China are down to 30% of the market, okay? And that's slowly, but probably quickly eroding. But to your question about Europe, they didn't have a line, okay? And yes, there are lots of JVs. I don't want to discount that Stellantis and GM and Ford have JVs all over the world, and we have to take those into consideration. But they caught themselves and said, wait a minute, we need to put some tariffs on these things. And damage had been done, and jobs had been impacted, and that's what we can't have happen here. Whether it's Flint or Smyrna or Mississippi or Toyota, doesn't matter. That would decimate to let it be open and uncontrolled, and that's why the line has been drawn right now.
What would you say to someone that says, look, it seems like the EV expansion is stalling somewhat, so are they even going to be a threat? Is this something that consumers are really going to be clamoring for?
When gas prices are $5,
they can sell
you
it for
better believe that.
$11,000.
Let's not discount the affordability issue, okay?
Yeah.
It's an issue, right? And I know that the Detroit 3 and all other companies that are in this market are looking at that right now, because when the average price of a vehicle is over $50,000, that's a problem. But that is the reality of it. So these companies, our companies, the hometown teams, are focused on that also, and they need to have some room to be able to do that too, But if you have an onslaught of $15,000, $20,000 EVs, the consumer doesn't care.
But let's be clear here. We're talking about Chinese vehicles. It doesn't matter how they're powered. Yes, China has a lead on electrified vehicles,
Yeah, it's
but
all
we're
of them.
talking about ICE-powered vehicles, hybrids, plug-in hybrids, and of course EVs. So this conversation isn't just about Chinese EVs. This is about Chinese vehicles, full stop.
Yeah.
All right, let's open the conversation with our guests in attendance here. If you have a question for Senator Slotkin or want to just join in on the conversation, we have a microphone here
We're going to
for you.
exit stage left.
Yeah, we're going to.
Oh, okay.
Of course.
Yeah.
It's convenient.
I guess then I'll move back
Yeah.
over here, because otherwise it looks like we don't like each other, which is untrue. First question at the back, please.
Yeah, hello. So thanks for taking questions. Best case scenario, if your legislation passes and everything goes the way you hope it goes, how long do we have? How long can we keep the Chinese vehicles out of our market?
So if you haven't noticed, Washington is not well right now, right? So it's not working at breakneck speed, even on things that it should be working on. So we introduced the bill. The good news is we did it completely bipartisan so that it could move. Other bills are dead on arrival when it's just a Democratic bill, for instance. So I think, we have a surface transportation bill coming up due by the end of the year. So in my heart of hearts, I would like to do something soon. We have built it so that it could be moving quickly. But realistically, if we got something done in the next year, I'd still be thrilled, right? That would still be breakneck speed for the way Washington is working. I think I will tell you, the crocodile closest to the boat for me is the summit. And I'm going to be reading every press release that comes out of that to see what they've agreed to. And if Chinese connected vehicles are not let in, and joint ventures where they have the majority stake are not allowed, and it's silent on those issues because they weren't discussed, I'll have a frickin' party. Okay? So that's my kind of near-term threat. And then longer term, I would love to get this done in the next year.
All right. Any other questions? Yes, Claude.
Working politically and diplomatically with an adversary who really just basically scoffs the law at intellectual property and acts in corporate espionage, as their. I mean, do you feel like you can even really negotiate, a deal when the other side just, blatantly, even lets we are going to cheat. We're just going to spend all that time doing it.
Yeah, I mean, look, you have tough negotiations, and the most important negotiations are those with someone who's an adversary, right? And in this case with China, it's very complicated. Like many of you work with them every single day, and so it's a complex thing. But we've had very complex negotiations over the years. Think of the Soviet Union. I mean, it's not like they were great, honest actors. You do the old Reaganism. You trust but verify, right? You don't do something just because someone says we're going to adhere to the law. You come up with verification. So you have to work at it. It is complex. And I think like any negotiation that you all have been part of, if you want a deal so bad, they can taste it. Right? And that's where you get into trouble. And so I think a lot of us putting a marker down was just to say, hey, it's not that any deal is better than no deal. Please don't make a bad deal.
Isn't that what happened originally with the entrance into the Chinese market in the first place? We saw
And letting them join the WTO and a whole bunch of
willing
things.
to give up intellectual property,
Look,
knowing it was going to be used against them.
I don't think that anyone should feel guilty about the fact that there really was a decision from Nixon on that if we were going to see China come into the family of nations and be a positive actor, that we should economically integrate with them because a rising tide will raise all boats. That was the theory. And, big, bright people on both sides of the aisle believed in that. I think there's just a big, profound conversation going on right now about whether that was right. That just because we economically integrated with them, does that mean that they've become more sort of akin to rules?
Benign.
Benign. And the same thing with Russia. There was a huge effort after the Cold War was over to try and integrate with them and see if they could do stuff. it turns out like they still do bad stuff, even when they have economic relations with us. So I guess I don't blame anyone for trying that. It just doesn't always work the way we want.
Next question. Yes.
Thank you, Elissa. My name is Mia Burbank, and I'm a local business owner.
Yep.
And I just have a question specifically, and I think Glenn may have touched on this a bit, but banning Chinese vehicles from coming into the U.S., understanding that they're dominating battery minerals,
Yep.
understanding that they're dominating the supply chain, are we really fixing the problem, or are we really shifting the dependency elsewhere?
Yeah. So again, I imagine everyone in this room has some sort of major component or a series of components that are from China where they've become very advanced and we're dependent. That's an assumption for me. I think the question is, I mean, sort of to the point we were making up here on the panel, are we just going to believe that China, despite their cheating, we are such believers in the free market in the United States that we should let in anyone and everyone, even if that means the decimation of this industry? That's how I see it, is opening the door and letting like the camel put the nose under the tent of something that is existential for our state and for the country. And far beyond just the auto industry and our parts community, I believe, like in my core, that the United States should always have a strong manufacturing base. I never want to cede that to any other country because I think it's so critical should we ever need it, right? We saw that in being the arsenal of democracy back in World War II, right? We rehabbed and changed our approach to help us win a world war. So to me, I understand that it's not perfect. I understand that there's those dependencies there. But for me, I feel like the road splits at a certain point, and you have a choice to make. Are you going to try to stop the tide, or are you just going to kind of give in? And for me, certainly, as the senator from Michigan, I felt like we have to at least make a stand. And we will negotiate with anyone in this room. Bernie Moreno and I will negotiate with anyone in this room on like the specifics that need to be written and amended into the bill to make it work, right? I'm not trying to screw my own industry. I'm trying to say I care about both the economic security and national security of this issue. But I'm open to anyone coming to me and saying, hey, I've got this little widget that I get from China, and if I don't have it, I'm dead in the water. Come and talk to us.
Critical waivers.
Yeah.
How worried are you that the Chinese retaliation, should your bill pass, by throttling back on strategic minerals or asking for compromises on our support for Taiwan? How have you factored in what the likely retaliation might be?
Yeah, look, they're already retaliating in a ton of different ways, and we're already giving them things that I think we shouldn't be giving them, right? We gave them NVIDIA microchips, our most advanced chips that we make, where there are American companies.
But we got a piece of the action.
But what? I mean, and I'm here for a deal, right?
Yeah.
But the juice has to be worth the squeeze. And I cannot tell you what we got for giving away our most sophisticated chips to China. And we've got American companies desperate for those chips. So I think we have a lot of leverage because, as you heard, the Chinese are making a ton of vehicles. They need to get rid of them, and they're licking their chops at our market and saying, we would love to get in there. So I do think we have leverage, and I think we should be using it. That's our only point. Use it.
All right. Any other questions?
I mean, are you there?
Yeah.
Using your analogy of the camel's nose under the tent,
Yeah.
there are dozens of Chinese-owned companies in the automotive industry
Yep.
here. They don't-
800 of them.
They don't have Chinese names, and they also manufacture Volvo vehicles, which is owned by Geely, in I think it's South Carolina.
Yep.
So how do we differentiate between those vehicles, which are 100% Chinese-owned, being made here now, and the BYDs and the Neos and all the others?
Yep. And it's the perfect timing for that question because I'm sure some of you saw over the past week the story of, was it Waymo using vehicles here in Detroit? And while the Waymo cars don't have the packages that are going back to China, the buses and the stuff that they produce does. And so there is no doubt about it that we are pregnant on this issue, right? But I think for me, as a CIA analyst, the parts that collect and then send that data back are fundamentally different from a piece of hardware that the Chinese company makes that literally isn't collecting intelligence. And again, there are variations. There's the brain of the car, and then there's, like someone was telling me, the headlights, right? Like if a headlight collects information, I want to know what kind of information that is. But to me, that's where, you know, the scalpel comes in, and we do things with a very sort of surgical approach. I'm open to all of that. But I guess, again, for me, it was like there's this fork in the road, especially when the president came here to Detroit and dropped, you know, like we might need to bring in Chinese vehicles. There's a fork in the road, and I just had to choose which path I was going to go down. And I'm just not going to let them come in wholesale without putting up a fight.
Well, you sent the message. We'll see if the message is received, hopefully, a week from now. Senator Slotkin, thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thanks to all of you.